we have a great day. Thank you to Theyazan for putting together a great schedule, and it's nice to see so many people here. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay. All right. Thanks for that. So to crack on, I think people are stuck in traffic in Tiverton. I think there's some bad traffic. So we're going to have to just crack on anyway. So my name is Theyazan Kelly. I'm the Catchment Sensitive Farming Advisor on the Exe. Just to give you a little bit of a run around, this is the schedule for the day. So if you haven't received the schedule, it's at the front if you need to grab one, grab that at lunch. Just to be prompt, we're going to try and stick to the schedule as best possible. What I'd say is that the day's split into two. So we have the talk now, and then we have the farm walk. Unfortunately, not everyone can make the farm walk. We had to limit it due to capacity. So if you don't have a ticket for the farm walk, please don't attend. But other than that, we'll just to say we have a couple of fire exits on your right hand side. So there's 3 on this side. So if in the event of an emergency, don't panic. Just walk patiently out, and we'll all get there. Additionally, I would say is enjoy yourself, and should be a cracking lineup. We have some great presenters, people who have experience of agroforestry. For instance, Jim McAdam, who's done research for 50 odd years, with the 35-year Loughgall experiment. Yeah, so enjoy yourselves, and if you need any help, I'm here, and there's 3 other CSFs. So just look for the logo, and we can help you there. So just a little introduction. So to give you some context, so farming lies within a wider sphere of influence. So you can think of it as the environment being the top hierarchy. So the environment dictates everything. We're dependent on it. And all of these influences, all of these factors, they all influence each other, and they're all dependent on each other. So you have the environment at the top, which society is within, and then you have the food system, which is within society, and then we have farming, which is in the food system. Today we'll be focusing on the relationship between the environment and farming, but it's just to highlight that humans are interconnected with the environment, and I suppose we sometimes take for granted. We think we dominate it. Well, realistically, if we were to chuck it and humans weren't around anymore, the environment would be laughing, because the planet will still go around the sun. So really, the focus, instead of it being on save the planet, we should be look after us. So resilient. Just to talk about the 2 next slides, it'll be about resilience. So the theme today is resilience. So I'll be talking about what resilience means, resilient people, resilient farming, resilient food systems, and resilient environment. So the definition of resilience is the ability to adapt to and overcome and recover from changing environments effectively. And often these changing environments can be unfavorable. So and a resilient person is somebody that can overcome situations unfavorable. So farmers are one of the most resilient people out there. They have to break their bodies day in, day out in harsh conditions, often not receiving much for it, and they have to face isolation, physical stress, mental stress. So the ability, you have to be resilient to be a farmer. You're either resilient or you're another, or both. But it's definitely a hard one. So I'd say that's a great example of what resilience is as a person. And if you think about farming, food production, resilience is about guaranteeing productivity regardless of circumstance. So 2018 drought, grass yields dropped. You had farmers having to bring in their cows during this time, feeding them, wasting money on with concentrates or using up their hay, and that's not sustainable in the long term. So I really want to be creating systems that you can provide food for, regardless of weather conditions. So a resilient food system is one that has intermediaries that have sustainable business models adapted to shock. So a shock can be anything from COVID to war in Ukraine. And we've been able to adapt. However, these issues will continue to rise, and with climate change and also geopolitically, tensions are rising, conflicts are increasing. It's a no-brainer really to try to reduce your inputs, because you're out of, with the speculative market, you're not in control of the price, and that uncertainty is only going to increase. A resilient environment is an environment that consists of unhindered natural processes. So you have your biodiversity and your species abundance, which regulates the systems and keeps the cycles going. And that we've naturally, through evolution, ecosystems have survived through millennia via these processes of change and adaptation to changes. So natural selection, survival of the fittest, the strongest species survived and the other ones got extinct. And what's happening, what we're experiencing at the moment, is a rate of change unprecedented. So we're trying our best to adapt to something that's quite severe. So soils, biodiversity loss, and you name it. So it's about really factoring it in and trying to put environment at the top as on the same level as production. So trees as buffers. So if you think about a tree, you can think of it as a buffer, and you can think of it as a car bumper. You might be wondering why there's a picture of a car that's a bit scratched up. And so in that sense, a bumper acts as a shock and it absorbs the shock, and that's what a buffer is. And in the same concept or idea, effectively a tree acts similarly. So it can absorb sunlight, it can take up water from waterlogged soil, and it takes out that environmental shock. So instead of that car collision, you think of other shocks like climate change and flooding. So you might want to protect your food production, which is in this concept the engine, and that's what keeps us going. So think of trees as car bumpers. We have in the past, for the last hundreds of years, farmed with silvopasture in mind. So traditionally in Devon, we're zoomed in here to Crediton, where we are today, but traditionally throughout Devon, there has been orchards, traditional orchards, and traditional orchards often were managed in silvopasture. So that you'd be grazing your cows or your sheep alongside your apple orchard or your tree orchard. And that map shows the red dots are the ones that have been removed since. The greens are the ones that remain. And so we know that it did work in the past, and for different reasons it's changed, things have changed. And we know from current research that it can work again, that you can have productive systems that can both feed and buffer from environmental stress. So it's good to recognize. It's important to recognize that the sexy word agroforestry is not necessarily a new. It's a new term, but it's not necessarily a new thing. So we are relearning sometimes. So at agroforestry in Devon, we have on the left, those are 5 farms that are part of the Devon Silvopasture Network, which is a 12-year trial run by innovative farmers. And we're very lucky to have that based in Devon, because we can get core information on relevant, climate relevant and soil relevant information on how agroforestry affects environment and vice versa. And then in the middle there, that's from the agroforestry open weekend. So that's a map, and there's 5 dots of farms that have opened up their farms every May. Elston Farm being one of them, the one we're visiting today. And they, you can add yourself, you can register as a farmer to open yourself up to guests for networking and learning purposes. And we can't really pinpoint how many farms there are in Devon that are practicing agroforestry, because there's probably many unaccounted for, seeing as it's a traditional method and it's this new buzzword that sometimes it's a bit off-putting, but you can say that there's at least 10. And then there's that Farm Woodland Forum, which has an agroforestry map, and they're looking to get people to put their map up on that website for policy research and networking. And lastly, I'm going to end on a high. So Elston Farm, the farm we'll be visiting today. These are two maps, and this is the red and the yellow lines are representing water flow pathways. So we use that quite often in CSF to highlight where the high risks are. So if we're going to put in roofing somewhere or concreting or vice versa, or might be something on the field, might be a burying buffer strip, where the location is best to put that and where the risks are. So there's a nice success story on Elston Farm. We didn't, I can't take credit for that. That was Andy Gray's doing. On the left-hand side, there's a picture of the stream in blue. And you can see strips there. It effectively looks like hedgerows. Those are the silvopasture strips. And once Andy Gray transitioned from arable to silvopasture, the amount of soil that was running down that slope drastically decreased rather. Let's hope it didn't increase. And so, so that you can plan and design your agroforestry system to reduce water pollution and also flooding. Now, I'll pass it on to John Cossens. Bear with us when we transfer the mics. But John will talk about the Creedy, give a little background on the work he does with the Environment Agency. Yeah, I'm just in your pocket. That's the yeah, so we're good. Okay. You can do the slides, yeah. And you can use this clicker if you want. Go left, yeah. Okay.
Morning, everyone. Good to see so many of you here. Some familiar faces. So I work for the Environment Agency. I've been there for the best part of 30 years. And during my time, my main job has been regulating and inspecting dairy units, and also beef and sheep, but mainly dairy. I work over in East Devon mainly, in the Axe catchment, with Tom Beard, and I've worked very closely with Tom in recent years. So personally, I farm myself. I live down near Tavistock. We've got a beef suckler herd, and we've got a few sheep as well, and just about to start lambing at the weekend. It's a pretty difficult time at the moment, and it's definitely tested my sense of humour as being a farmer. It's all out there, isn't it? And faced with other problems that we've discussed this morning, and blue tongue and all the other things that are on the horizon, it's a very, very difficult time. But Theyazan has asked me here today to talk to you about the Creedy and Yo. We've been working on the Creedy and Yo now for about 18 months. And it's not a great story, I'm afraid, and it doesn't really have a fairy tale ending yet. But just going back to the Axe, so I've been working in the Axe catchment for 9 years, trying to improve water quality and in particularly phosphorus. We are now, after 9 years, starting to see improvements in water quality. And most of the farms in the Axe catchment now have 6 months slurry storage. And by and large, they're fairly compliant with most of the regulations. So when Theyazan asked me to do the presentation today, it was a bit like Groundhog Day for me, really, winding the clock back 9 years. So I actually used quite a bit of the presentation I did to the Axe farmers 9 years ago for the presentation today, because we're kind of back to where we were when I started in the Axe. So I'll move on. So the main reason that we're in the Creedy and Yo area is because of the water quality. And not to beat around the bush, it's absolutely terrible. The red dots on the map represent sampling points, and where we take regular samples to monitor water quality. None of this is particularly good. Phosphorus is the main one that stands out, and fish also. The lower Creedy is bad. That is very, very unusual to see that in a rural location. That would be what I would expect around Manchester, Birmingham and London. I wouldn't expect to find that kind of status in rural Devon. But we are where we are, and we're trying to improve things. Some of you may have been to presentations that I've done before, but we use a lot of satellite imagery to focus our attention on particular farms. So when we started the project back 18 months ago, our main focus was on bare earth and fields that were left bare during the winter, because they obviously give us problems with runoff, flood risk, sediment pollution, phosphorus, and all the other things that go with it. So we've been working in the Creedy and Yo and feeding back images that we've taken on farms. And this particular image is a very high resolution satellite imagery, which we have to pay for, which we get twice a year. The resolution on it is that good. So up in the top left, you can see some slurry, winter slurry spreading, obviously lots of bare ground. This was taken, that particular picture was taken on the 25th of November last year. So we've been using this intelligence and training AI that we have as well to identify rills and gullies in fields, and then either enforce remotely or go and see farmers and do inspections.
And it's a red. What's a red field? What do they? They just bare ground.
Yeah, that's just bare ground. Yeah, just bare ground. So I know what the talk is about today, about agroforestry, and now I know what we're talking about today. There's two reasons for this slide. So all of the photographs in my presentation are all Creedy and Yo photographs. And they're just normal photographs, so I haven't selected the worst ones that I've seen or the best ones. They're just average. So this is one, the big picture on the left-hand side is a block of fields. I really apologise if there's anybody from the Creedy and Yo catchments in here. I'll try to keep the photographs as discreet as possible, not to identify it. This really isn't a finger pointing exercise. It's just to demonstrate the problems that there are. And you guys are all farmers. You've all seen them driving around the countryside, and may have had issues yourself. The last 18 months in particular have been very difficult to be able to farm in, and it's been very difficult to carry out cultivations and try and maintain good soil structure in very challenging conditions. But this was a rill in a gully that we identified from the satellite, and we went out and spoke to the farmer and talked about cultivations and all the other things. But there's one point that I really wanted to make about that slide on the left-hand side, is that I look at that block of ground now, and after farming at home, I'm fourth generation farming at home, actually that side on the left is, the land may be lovely and it's all in crops, but actually it offers no habitat whatsoever. It offers nothing, and it is pretty much devoid of life. We have to farm with nature. And it doesn't actually mean a cost to production. We just need to do a better job, because that, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. That's outside of my remit as being Environment Agency, but it is a personal plea to farmers to do a better job. Getting the flail mower out on the 1st of September and flail mowing your hedges to death. It's just a tragedy, really. We've just got to do a better job. Sediment pollution is very bad in the Creedy and Yo, typical running down the river. rills and gullies in fields, and sediment there entering watercourse. What we found during the 18 months, probably no surprise really. Winter slurry spreading, some of it in MVZ as well. And it's absolutely no surprise why parts of the catchment are in an MVZ, because there are still farms that don't have any slurry storage, or very similar to this one here, where they literally have only a week's storage and they're out spreading. So the weather patterns, as Theyazan has said, the weather patterns are changing, and runoff is becoming much more of a problem. And all that runoff, you know, after, what was it, a couple of weeks ago when we had that 2 or 3 inches of rain on the Sunday, there were quite a few farms that were keen to get out and spread slurry for that first cut of silage. And then we had those 2 or 3 inches of rain on the Sunday, and guess what? It wasn't there on the Monday. So we found lots of problems, lots of leaky infrastructure, and we're working with farmers to try and resolve this. Now, we know from the work that we've done in East Devon that farms that are compliant with all the regulations are much more profitable than the farms that aren't. So having enough slurry storage and being able to apply nutrients to the land when there's soil and crop need can save an awful lot of money. And I've done a lot of case studies for DEFRA demonstrating that very fact. As you can see, that was fairly typical of what we found on a number of farms, and that is not unusual. I won't get into the minimum tillage debate, but minimum tillage for me can be a big problem. And I know a lot of farmers have been driven that way. It's very fashionable at the moment, but minimum tillage is very, very tricky in the southwest, and it can cause us a lot of problems. So that one there is typical. This one here is sewage fungus, which is a bioindicator of nutrients getting into a watercourse, and something that people should, when they do get a minute spare and they take the dog for a walk around the farm, is to look at the watercourses around the farm. And if you're seeing this kind of stuff in there, you've got a problem. You've got a problem on the farm. And that's something that you can monitor yourselves. Okay, so look at the pipes that come out from the farm that perhaps take the roof water, or what you think is a clean yard area. Look at those pipes and monitor them. And if you're seeing this kind of cotton wool type material around the end of those pipes, nothing above it, but you're getting that below it, you've got a problem with infrastructure on the farm. There's some leaky infrastructure there somewhere, and you need to investigate it and stop it. This will contain background nutrients. It can be a lot worse than that. This stuff can be grey, it can be pink, white, various different colours. It can look like clouds or balls of cotton wool. Or it can be quite like a horse's tail, long and kind of sweepy in the water. So that's how many farms we've inspected, 49. Overall compliance is 67%. 43% of farms don't have enough slurry storage. Actually, I think that figure is higher than that, to be perfectly honest. 46% are non-compliant with farming rules. 66% are non-compliant with the MVZ regs. On a personal note, I've looked at quite a few MVZ records of farms in the area, and I haven't, apart from one farm, I've not seen a single set of anywhere near compliant MVZ records. And I know some of my other colleagues that have worked in the catchments are the same. So I think that 66% is definitely on the low side. It's much higher. CSF offer a very good template, offer a very good template for those of you in an MVZ, and it is really easy to use. And it gives us a really easy format to be able to inspect against as well. So we'll be here in the Creedy for at least another 18 months. and we'll continue to monitor what goes on with water quality and through satellite imagery, and we'll continue to work with CSF to resolve problems on farms. Any questions?
But I'll just say, in the interest of time, we will bring in John McAdam, and then we'll do questions at the end of that segment so that we can catch up on what we're behind. All right, so without further ado, we'll have Jim McAdam. Yeah, I can see it. Okay.
I don't think the microphone just all get in.
What?
I don't think the microphone will.
This one, yeah. Yeah, it seems like the one.
Turned on.
Okay, yeah, I'll check that.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, that's the clicker there.
Okay, everyone hear me okay? Thank you. And thanks, Theyazan, for organising this and for inviting me along. Looking forward to it. And thank you, John, for setting the scene and stark reality of what we're trying to deal with here. And that's what I would hope to come around with my talk. My background is I worked for the Department of Agriculture in Northern Ireland for 40 odd years. I was responsible for the agroforestry research programme, which we started at Loughgall Field Station in 1989, really. So it is, as Anna said, it's really the longest running, probably silvopastoral experiment we have left in the UK. It was part of a network of 6 trials, and I think the one in Loughgall is the only one that's still remaining reasonably intact. So what I'm really going to talk about today is the lessons we've learned from that, the experience we have, and maybe how those can apply to some of the problems you're having here and how it can fit in. I should say it yesterday, I spent the day being shown around, I think we saw 6 or 7 silvopastures in Devon and Cornwall, most of them based on nut and fruit production. Quite impressive what can be done. You know, you're tying in growing trees with meeting food security, with delivering all the environmental benefits that trees bring. So I think there's great potential here, and I will obviously focus on the water quality issues. So as I say, my background was in, but I'm not a forester. I never entered into this agroforestry business to do anything with forestry, but I was a grassland scientist and I was responsible for trying to make it. If you think back to the 1980s, huge issue in the UK with grassland intensification. We had over fertilisation of fields, we had removal of hedges, we had just intensive grassland, a denuded landscape with no biodiversity in it. So a group of us were looking for ways in which we could make intensive grassland more sustainable. And one of those ways was to try and get more trees into pasture, into the grassland system, and still keep farming economically and still keep running a grassland farm, but having trees integrated into that. We looked at models around the world, and the one that appealed to us, one of the problems, I don't know the average farm size in Devon, but in Northern Ireland, our average farm size is just under 25 hectares. So we're talking about small farms, family-run farms, who are not able to take 2 or 3 hectares out of the farm and put it into forestry or into woodland. So we really had to look at how could we get trees in with having minimum impact on farm size. And we looked at a New Zealand model where they were having big problems in South Island, New Zealand, with overgrazing and erosion on steep-sided grassland. And one of the solutions they'd had there was planting white space, in their case radiata pine, which was growing quickly enough that they could get sheep in quickly again and keep grazing, but stabilizing those banks, and the system was working. So that was a sort of model we followed here. And I'm going to just take you through that path and look at, particularly in relation to sort of the grass growth, soil, water resilience side of things. Okay, what do we mean by agroforestry? And I always start every talk by saying I don't like the word agroforestry because it implies a form of forestry, which I don't see it as that. I see it really as a form of a grassland system with a few trees stuck on it to try and make it a bit more environmentally friendly. But that's being a bit fast, I know. But it is really integrating trees into farms. And in an agroforestry system, you combine trees with crops and our animals, and the key is on the same unit of land. So you have that interaction of the trees with your farming system in as close a way as possible. And that gives you significant ecological, environmental, and just resilience interactions between the components. So it's really about integrating trees into farms with the minimum impact on the farm activity. And if somebody went with a better word, I would like to hear tree pasture is one thing that could be said, where at least got the grass side on it a bit more. If we think of sort of going back to, as Theyazan was talking about, sort of ecological principles, one of the most fundamental ecological principle is that the more complex a system, the more stable it is. If you think of just of simply of a grassland system there, where you have just grass growing and you have your grass crop, the roots below the ground, you have very little opportunity for diversity there. It's a pretty simple system, and the more simple a system is, the more likely it is to break down if it meets extremes. So if you have a system like a grass system, with too much slurry on, too much fertilizer, there's too much rain, it leaks out of the system immediately. So if you stick a tree into that system, you immediately introduce a whole level of complexity, which makes it much more stable, much more resilient to all those things we're sort of throwing at them in farming systems now, particularly below the ground. And that's, I think we're only coming to realise more this below ground interactions in these silvopastoral systems are really where a lot of the benefit is, and that's what I'm going to sort of focus on today, as well as all the other things. And Lindsay, I know, will talk about the impact on the animals and so on, which is a huge benefit. So if we think of this idea of, well, ecosystem services, once again, like big words, but it's just really what does nature do? What do we get from nature? And that's really what we mean by all those other things that nature delivers to us, or farming systems deliver for us. So if we had just a simple grazing system, okay, it's good enough. It's got some carbon storage in the soil, which is very important. It's got fodder for the animals. It's got meat. It's got wool. It's got a very limited amount of biodiversity. As the aim of a lot of farmers is to have a single species, even single variety swards, which makes them simpler to manage. And if we introduce our silvopasture, and that's our Loughgall trial, probably about 16 or 17 years old, that's with Ash. And there, we think all the benefits that we're getting from a system like that. We're getting the timber, renewable energy, as you thin it out. We have pollinators if we use the right type of trees. We have biodiversity, we have fodder from the trees as well, very important. And then below the ground, we've got flood control, carbon storage, healthy soil, water purification, all those benefits, which just simply putting trees into a grassland system can bring. So 35 years ago, this group of us, 6 people in the UK, decided to set up an experiment where we would see if silvopasture could actually work in the UK. We did it at 6 sites. We one near here, near Oakhampton, a place called Northwick Research Station, and it's gone now. The trial's gone. And we had 2 in Northern Ireland. We had 1 in Scotland and a couple in Wales and so on. But we all did exactly it. It was a really, really good trial because at every site we had large enough plots, a hectare each plot, and we had 3 replicas of each treatment, and then we had that replicated 6 times across the UK, and we did exactly the same measurements. We kept to a constant sward height. We used sheep for grazing. We did pick animals that were suited to our own location, and we used sycamore was the species we used for tree because it was the one tree that grew everywhere. We thought we would use that, and that was a mistake well, it wasn't a mistake, but we got bad stock. We had to try and get, so many thousand sycamore plants exactly the same to get them planted in the same week. And we just didn't get good stock. But at each site, we at least had the foresight to have a duplicate set of plots for a tree that would be typical for our own area or with a potential. And we chose ash because we didn't know what was coming down the road with ash, but that doesn't matter. I think we've learned the lessons of how the system will work with the ash. And we fortunately had duplicate plots of ash as well. And on the other sites, the same thing. So we did learn the benefits, even though the sycamore didn't work out perhaps as planned. So we planted the trees into grassland. The whole site was ploughed, sown down in ryegrass clover pasture, and trees were planted. And from the day the trees were planted, the animals were in with them. We had them. I don't think that. Yeah, that's really just at the early stages of planting. The trees were in a tube to protect them with posts to keep them upright. We work with sheep too. Nowadays, we're focusing concentration on cattle. How can we protect trees better against cattle? And we can talk about that later on today or this afternoon. But because it was a research trial, everything was in neat lines, square, uniformly laid out, the same species, the same clones and everything. In reality, you wouldn't do that. You can follow the landscape. You could follow your hedge around with rows of trees. You could contour plant. You would use mixtures of trees, all those sorts of things for the different benefits. But we were trying to just demonstrate the principles of how, and none of us on any of those trials were foresters. The forestry department were not interested. This is no way to grow trees. They said, now I think the good advances we've made in recent years, we now have foresters and grasslands people on board, and we're now looking at it from a systems point of view, and you can grow good productive trees in this system, and that's one of the strong points I would make. And trees with nuts, trees with fruit, trees for timber or whatever. We found first of all that yes, you could manage grassland like this. You could just apply fertilizers normal, you could top, you could do any of the normal grassland practices you wanted to. We probably didn't focus that much on the quality of the management of the trees. We could have had better formed trees, so that's because our forestry colleagues just weren't particularly interested in it. But now we know we could have got much better trees at the end of the day. And that's just the trial as it sort of went through its history being developed. Tree protection was something that was new to us in a way. Okay, we used the 2X plastic tubes. After that, we took the tubes off whenever the trees were getting big for them, 4 or 5 years. But we found that the sheep then were nibbling the bark of the trees. After a while, they were in with them. A couple of problems there. One was we were following a set stocking regime. In other words, the animals went on just after they lambed, and we wanted to follow them right through till the lambs were slaughtered. So they were kept set stocked on the plots, and we varied the numbers of extra sheep to manage the grass. But we were focusing on trying to get data from production data right through, following the same stock through. That was a mistake. Looking back on it, we would now advocate very strongly rotational grazing, because most of the damage to the trees occurs after the sheep have been in for quite a while, and then they get bored, they get used to the trees. So with a rotational grazing system, you can greatly minimize your protection effort, and that's what we found from that. So we had to put that netting again, another layer. Now we wouldn't do that. But the trees developed then by about 12 or 13. We were measuring, of course, the yield of. We were comparing all sorts of data from these above ground production, below ground production. We were measuring grass growth there on the grass plots, which were all randomly allocated within, and on the tree plots. And our farm manager was able to manage the pasture through that we were concerned with, and so on. After about 12 or 13 years, we found that's whenever we found that grass yield was starting to fall off. Well, grass yield, I think, fell off a bit before that, but because of the additional benefits the trees were giving to livestock, we only started to get a decrease in livestock production after about 12 or 13 years. Now, that was a huge surprise because all the computer predictions were that after about 7 or 8 years, the shade from those trees would be reducing grass growth, but that didn't happen. Two reasons. I think grass was a more plastic or tolerant crop than we imagined in shade. And secondly, the animals were getting additional benefit from the trees being there. So, but then after about 12 years, we had to make a decision. The powers that be and Department of Agriculture thought it was a waste of time and the whole thing. So they didn't really care what we did with the trial. But we had to decide what was the future going. We were at a point where we could decide, right, do we just leave these trees at that density? Sorry, these were 400 trees per hectare, trees planted 5 metres apart. And we could decide, will we start thinning the trees out, let more light in, let the pasture grow, or will we just, is the future not going to be much interest in meat production? Will trees have a better value in timber in the future than sheep might have? And we made the decision we'd then start thinning the trees, and we thinned a quarter. We took a quarter of the trees out. Those were ash, so they were valuable for the hurley stick market. We got €1,000 a hectare from the first thinning on those. So that was a bit of income coming in. But it meant the grass production picked up again. And we've done 2 subsequent thinnings since. So that trial is now at about 120, 130 trees per hectare. And that's probably a final crop that you would have in it. Anytime we brought farmers to see, we had open days and so on every year. And the one thing farmers liked about the system was the fact you could make that choice. You could be that flexibility in the system. If they planted woodland, that was it for 50 years, 60 years. Whereas here, they could change the direction, if you like, of the farming system they were using. In other words, they could be farming for trees if they want to continue to do that, or they could do the thinning and they could then sort of let their grassland side develop more. It's having that ability to change a bit and that flexibility, depending on the needs and demands, were something that they liked. So now we have something like, well, that's a few years ago. I'll show you more recent ones. But the system developed well. We showed that you could. By then, we were down to about 120 trees per hectare. So we just removed the trees on form basis. We just kept picking out the best trees each time that would be marketable. So we've ended up with a sward which is probably about 70-75% production of the area outside the trees, roughly. And there's a bit more valuable, there's a bit more weeds grow in it. What's a weed? More valuable plants, so the nutrition for the animals is a bit better. That's the trial a couple of weeks ago, or over this winter, where about 10 or 12 years ago, ash dieback started to hit us. So we realised that we have to start thinking ahead. What are we going to try and do with that? And at that time, we were also involved in Teagasc in the south of Ireland on a trial looking at cherry form of wild cherry. And we had set up a clonal trial with about, I think, nearly 30 different clones of trial on some of the plots that the agroforestry trial had still kept going, but on some of the wider spacings and on the sycamore tree plots we were left where we could reuse those. So we had planted not for agroforestry purposes, but you can see in the background there those rows of well-pruned cherry, because our forestry colleagues were really on board now. And we then, those were actually nursed with ash at the start. Those are about 9 or 10 years old, those cherry. They're straight as a die, they're lovely form, and we've had cattle in them now for the last 2 years, unprotected in the trees, doing perfectly well. And that gives us an option to offer in place of ash, for instance. That's the cherry at the minute, just at last November, sorry, the word. So there's, well, trees that were well looked after, they've been pruned. We've now, just this last couple of weeks, I say my colleagues who are left working away on the trial, we've removed every other cherry tree. So we've thinned that now, and that will be, my view, that will be sort of an ideal silvopasture for someone who wants to produce good timber and still have livestock production. So the other things that were going on at Loughgall, so that trial still there, still exists. The ash are surprisingly okay. Some of them, most of them have dieback, but it's very slow to develop in them. And we think, and my colleagues have had a project going now looking at the fact that the animals love the tree fodder is the other big winner we get from that. And I won't steal Lindsay's thunder because she will have focused on the value of tree fodder, which is obviously substantial. But what happens with the ash, when they drop their leaves, the sheep immediately eat the leaves. They like the tree fodder. And ash dieback is a fungal disease where the fungus overwinters on the leaf litter and then reinfects the tree in the next year. So if you're clearing up your leaf litter as you go along, you're not completely removing the source of infection because of your spores in the air all around, but you are at least minimizing the rate at which it will continue to reinfect the tree. So there is a positive benefit there. We have the wild cherry area, which I showed you with the cattle down below there. The original trial is still going. We planted then some rows. We had in 1995, we decided to put in about a hectare of silvo-arable land, and we put the field down to barley, and we put rows of poplar, 14-metre spacings top there. We grew barley crop for 6 years under that, each year just ploughing right up to the trees. Didn't have any effect on the tree either growth, minimal effect on the crop. But at the end of that, we decided just to grass that down. In fact, we did a couple of years of Rory. Lonnie did a trial of coppice willow in between there. But so we now have a silvopasture, which started as silvo-arable. We did no tree protection on it because the poplar we just planted into the arable crop and weren't grazing. And we now have a silvopasture. So you can get there by different routes. We've had a trial looking at welfare of pigs in silvopasture in some oak. We had there at the station that were planted as part of another agroforestry trial, and the pigs doing really well. The results of that trial was carried out last year. I haven't seen the final results, but I know everybody was happy with the performance of the pigs. And then on the other site we had Northern Ireland, which was an upland farm in the Antrim Hills. The farmer there planted, he used sycamore as well, but his sycamore have done pretty well okay there, and he has kept. We had to give up on his farm. There was, whenever the funding was sort of running out, we concentrated on Loughgall. But he was fortunately especially interested just to keep the silvopasture there. So he has on his hill sheep farm, he outwinters his cattle and sheep in the sycamore, and the trees benefit from the animals benefit from the shade, the shelter, and soil benefits. So it's a good site, still there, and we do plan to sort of use it a bit more. So the evidence base we have from that trial is, first of all, that silvopasture worked. We could maintain livestock production on it. We could extend the length of the grazing season. That's a big selling point. You can keep animals out longer because the tree roots open the soil, the porosity lets the water run away from the soil. I'll show you the data for that in a minute. If you can extend the length, one of our biggest problems with grass farming is ammonia. Our ammonia content in air ammonia in Ireland generally is just serious. It's not going down, it's going up, and it's one of the big issues one of the big problems that agriculture is facing. I'm sure it is here, but it's maybe not top of the agenda as it is with us. So anything you can do to reduce ammonia in intensive livestock systems is worth looking at. And one of those things is if you keep an animal outside a house, it only produces 6% of the ammonia that it does if it's inside the house. So therefore, if you can keep animals out, you can. It's part of the solution. It's not going to be the other, the reducing slurry and all sorts of other issues that go along with that. We've obviously got increased biodiversity and carbon sequestration from trees. That's greater. And we've reduced water runoff and reduced nutrient loss, because any nutrients that escape below the grass roots, the tree roots are down there, maybe a metre and a half, and they're picking up any extra nutrients that will leak below the grass. And with all the benefits from animal health and welfare and reduced greenhouse gas emissions. And then also, of course, if you manage your trees well, or no matter what, you have other outputs, you have the tree fodder, you have the timber, fruit, berries, nuts, any of those sorts of things are an option. But let's just look at sort of these components of the system that we're talking about. How do we manage them? In terms of soil health, worldwide, there's good research that shows that agroforestry, where you have trees mixed with pasture and an understory, brings big benefits to soil health. Your organic matter is higher, particularly carbon, is bound tighter onto the smaller soil particles that the tree roots create, and we've proven that by comparing. Because don't forget, here we have grass-only plots managed for 35 years the same way as tree grass plots, and they both started off with a ploughed field and exactly the same. So we can look at all of these factors in detail, the effect it's had on soil. Current interest, of course, in multi-species swards and the rooting depths and so on, and that and all of that. Where you're using that mixed plants in your sward, as well as the grazing value of those plants for protein and minerals and so on. So what's happening below the ground is important, where you have different root systems and you're exploiting that soil volume and you're getting more benefits into the trees themselves. Earthworms, a big indicator of soil health. With a student from Dundalk College, she did her project 2020 on that we hadn't measured any earthworm data for about 20 years in the plots, because in the early years we had one of the benefits we have in Northern Ireland is the university is tied in closely with the Department of Agriculture, the government department. So we had access to a lot of PhD and master's students. So we did a lot of the biodiversity work. A lot of the early research was done in great detail through the university level. We had a big gap then for quite a lot of years where we didn't have that, where the two were actually the functions of both were separated. But Rachel O'Connell came wanted to do a project on earthworms, so she looked at the earthworm numbers in the Silvopasture, which was by then 25, 26 years old, and no, a bit older. And she compared the earthworm counts, and we found that, as we'd expected, almost double the amount of earthworms in our silvopasture as in the grass. So that's a good an indicator of soil health as you can get, really, at the end of the day, we found. This ability to extend the length of the grazing season is really important, I think, because particularly in grass farming areas, as I've said, the longer you can keep animals out of the house, the better. You're minimising your slurry issues. So we were observing that on our silvopasture plots, they weren't getting as wet in the winter. We could keep animals on them longer. So a couple of years before I retired, I managed to get the staff to look at soil moisture profile over the winter on those plots. This is in 1617, and the two graphs at the top, these are graphs of the soil moisture content over the winter from about August through to the following May, April. And in the grassland plots, you can see your soil moisture, that's its profile. The agroforestry, it's significantly drier, lower soil moisture content. Now, my soil research colleagues tell me that about the soil moisture content of about 40% is really the limit. Over that, you're really going to get poaching problems on most soils. So if you aim sort of for that, so if we took the 40% line there, you can see it in the grassland, the soil moisture was above 40% in that year for 17 weeks longer than the agroforestry plant. So you were able to get technically 17 weeks longer out and keeping animals out. So if you use your agroforestry strategically to build up a fund of, and particularly about 2/3 of that benefit is in the autumn and about 1/3 in the spring. So if you save grass for the autumn, you could get an autumn grazing, you could keep animals out longer using your silvopasture, and that way it can be integrated into your grazing system. With no bother with sheep performance, with no negative effect on wool, on meat quality, on all of that. We looked at measure all of those things. Lambs were put, so whenever they went for slaughter, we got detailed carcass results from them and everything. And as I said, we talked about year 13, we removed the trees and some of the trees, and once again, all of those spelling. The system is suitable for cattle. But after about 5 or 6 years, we did put cattle into ours, and there was no problem after that. Then they will talk about the other benefits from that. I just mentioned one. Another trial has just been carried out in Northern Ireland on. All right.
Yeah, you'll have probably 10 minutes for talks, but
Okay.
it depends when you want to answer.
Right. Okay. And there's good evidence that we've had a trial done on a farm near Derry where the farmer has a couple of field willow plantation to put in for biomass. The whole bottom fell out of the biomass industry, and he's now faced with having all this willow coppice. And but he's a beef farmer as well, so he's doing some grazing trials on the willow. And the AFBI scientists are monitoring the methane emissions from the animals, tanks and stuff on them. And they're finding the figure he got last year was 26% reduction in methane, and the same level of performance, because the animals, of course, are getting benefits from eating the willow leaves, but their methane output is down by about 26%. That's pretty significant. We have an intensive livestock system, and you're worried about your emissions profile. Suits agroforestry can suit pig and poultry units. A lot of proven benefits there. Of course, bird flu restrictions, we have them. I'm sure you have them there too. So bear in mind the warning there. And there's this opportunity to grow a valuable crop for timber, for fuel, and other things. I mean, it's been today that you can actually grow. In terms of designing systems, we want to talk about that later. I think the secret here is to try not to look at one field and say, this field on a farm is where you could put silvopasture. Let's take a whole farm approach and see how could I get trees integrated into anywhere on that farm. Concentrate on your water courses. Get a riparian buffer planted along all your water courses for a start, maybe 5 meters back, plant 1 or 2 rows of trees. That will help minimize the nutrients getting into your water system. Look at unused corners and fields. Maybe extend your hedges by a row of trees out. All of those things can be done at fairly minimal impact. And if you're a dairy farmer, you don't want to be touching your grazing platform around the farm, which is where all your machinery is going through, your animals are going through. Don't plant rows of trees there. They're only going to be a nuisance to you. As you move back out through the farm to areas where you've got dry stock and you're really, use your trees there. Areas you're going to cut, put wide rows of trees, 8 or 10 meters apart, so you can cut silage between them. And just think of ways from the whole farm basis how you, and I guarantee you could get 10-15% tree cover on a farm and have negligible influence, even a positive effect from the positive benefits the trees bring, if you look at it that way. This is just on my own farm home where I have a wee bit of agroforestry. I've planted there's a hill here. I've planted a riparian buffer of trees along the side of the water course. It's just a small patch and it makes a difference. This resilience to extremes of weather, now to sort of finish up on this, we measured, I think after the plots were about 22, 23 years old, we looked at a probe, used a probe that was right down through the ground and measured the porosity of the soil as you go down. And we found that right down to 80 centimetres, there was significantly more soil, significantly more porous where you'd had trees planted than where there was grass. In other words, the water is getting away from those trees. And that is the reason why you have the benefits in terms of water, flood mitigation, flood runoff. And a mature tree will take about 200, 220 litres of water a day out of the ground. If you have a silvopasture and you're down to 200 trees, 150 trees per hectare, you know, you're taking tens of thousands of litres of water a day from that soil whenever you're having conditions of rainfall and things. In terms of resilience to drought, I'm sure you had the same as us. 2018, big drought, where this is grass profile from a whole series of plots over Northern Ireland. That's the 10-year average there. The red was what happened in 2018. Grass growth just about stopped in the middle of the summer. People said to me, your silvopasture will be a disaster. It'll be a desert under those trees alone. The opposite was true. The only place we had grass was actually, that's in August 2018, was under those trees. Two things, I think, we didn't have the techniques to measure it all, but I think it was reduction in evapotranspiration, which is important, and the shelter, the shade that the trees were bringing from the sun, just been beaten down on the ground all the time. And that's, people say, oh, that was an exceptional year, but it's not an exceptional year. If you look at our 10-year average, we still, and since then, haven't even picked up to that average. Yeah, if you look at 2024, there we're below, and if you look at 2023, I think the other one, yeah, we're still every year coming out at summer grass yields which are below, you know, what we'd expect. And evapotranspiration is a big thing. Water moving out, taken out through the plants and through the soil. If you can slow that down anyway, and having trees on that will slow evapotranspiration. So this soil moisture deficit period you get middle of the summer, you can reduce that. Shelter can do that. In areas where we have wet pastures, a lot of on more marginal land where you have rushes, wet pastures, cattle can do a lot. But planting trees in those and getting cattle into them can really change the whole ecology and the whole soil biology of those. And if you look at, I've looked at your sort of weather average in Devon here, where you have your temperature, your rainfall, you're getting sort of a profile fairly the same to the south of the south of Ireland here, you know, so I think the same benefits you could find here at the end of the day. And finally, sort of what role could hedgerows and trees and scrub play in the battle to combat flooding, which is really because our rainfall patterns are changing quite substantially. Say we're getting not a big difference in the amount of rain, but we're getting a difference in the way rain comes. It's coming in huge deluges. We're getting floods and runoff and creating the problems that you were talking about. And trees and hedges can play a big role trying to mitigate against that. Every loss is a quote I said, every loss, tree, hedge, and patch of scrub translated to more flooded water. And if you can use trees to remove water, that's fine. Those are just, once again, an example of riparian upper planting alongside white space trees in the fields, in the land, perhaps alongside your rivers and water courses. That can help reduce and even planting clumps of trees, fenced off clumps of, say, 4 by 4, 16 or 25 trees. So we can get trees into that system. So just to finish up, sort of on farm, talking about putting those things together, you know, break up large sloping fields with hedges. That can help reduce your runoff and your water into the water courses. Ensure that there's a good wooded hedge buffer between sloping land and drains. A lot of your land is, you have a lot of steep valleys. I've seen there's a lot of trees could be on those valleys and at the bottom of those valleys, and they could be taking up a lot of nutrients down there. And all that benefit's been planted. Land is planted with trees, and we reduce your level of emission of erosion substantially. And floodplain areas can benefit from alder, willow, birch, trees that can tolerate those sorts of conditions. And some of the walnuts and stuff we looked at yesterday, we're really doing much better down in the wetter, damper areas. And all those are just suitable for agroforestry. So for further information, and one thing I'd ask you to remember is Devon's far closer to Ireland than it is to most of the rest of England. So just think of what we're doing in Ireland. Agroforestry gets great support in the south of Ireland. They have a tremendous grant system for agroforestry. €8,500 a hectare for planting 400 trees per hectare, and €1,000 per hectare for 10 years afterwards. Making we, you know, that it's a no-brainer really. The only issue is the land's classified as forestry, and that puts some farmers off. But it has been taken up at quite a rate, and so agroforestry is really taken up there. We don't have any grant at the minute in Northern Ireland. And Jim will tell you here, of course, you're now getting good support for agroforestry here. So there is a lot of movement out there. There's a lot of good information from Ireland, and we have, with the Irish Agroforestry Forum, we're very well supported by the Southern Irish Government to promote agroforestry throughout Ireland. We're just a good wee booklet, which is, it's about the grant, but it's more also about examples and stuff of how you contact forestry. I've got 20 or 30 copies, so you can share them out if anybody wants them. Farm Woodland Forum is a good source of advice and help on agroforestry. And Forestry Commission, of course, Jim will talk about what he does there. And URAF as well. There's a lot of interest in agroforestry across Europe, and we can learn a lot from what goes on there. So you to remember, Devon's closer to Ireland than this. Thank you very much.
That was a great, in the interest of time, fortunately, we can't grab questions. However, I would encourage you to grab Jim on the side during the breaks and give him a question, and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer. All right, well, we have a break time, so get yourself some breather outside, get a cup of tea, coffee, and we'll be back shortly. So it's a quick one, just a 5-minute flash in out, and we'll get back into it. All right, thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah. Will there be additional places that you want to consider it at the end of the day? Agroforestry leaflets anyway.